Welcome to Lawline. Today we've come to the Appellate Division First Department to meet the appellate justices and take a tour of one of New York City's most beautiful courthouses and historical landmarks. The Appellate Division First Department is a courthouse remarkable for its architectural elegance. When the justices of the Appellate Division approved the plans of architect James Brown Lord on June 22, 1896, they could hardly foresee the splendid consequences of their decision. The city set aside $700,000 to cover the cost of the building, an unusual large sum in those days. As hard as it may seem for us to believe today, the final cost, $633,000, came to less than the estimate, and from that about one-third was spent on decoration. Few governmental buildings outside of the national capital have successfully integrated the beauty of sculpture and art within a functional working environment. The Honorable Francis Murphy, presiding justice of the Appellate Division First Department, has graciously agreed to take us on a walking tour of this magnificent courthouse. We'll also be talking to the associate justices and find out what it's like to work in one of the busiest appellate courts in the world. This area is pretty much the same as it was at the turn of the century. If you were an attorney arguing a motion before the Appellate Division, you'd stop here first, check your coat, your top hat, and your cane with the clerk before entering the courtroom. At the far end of the room was a small booth that had a Western Union hookup, where the court decisions could be instantaneously sent to any part of the country. Thank you, Judge Murphy, for allowing us into your courthouse. It's certainly a magnificent courtroom.
We're very glad you came. After all, we like the public to see this building. It's a gem of a courthouse in the city of New York, here at 25th Street and on Madison Avenue. Not many people know about this courtroom.
Judge, now we're sitting in the Appellate Division First Department. What type of cases are heard here?
Well, the Appellate Division is a court that was established in 1894 by the Constitution of 1894, the New York State Constitution. And we are part of the Supreme Court. And as you know, the Supreme Court is the trial parts for civil and criminal cases in the city of New York. And the Appellate Division hears the appeals from the Supreme Court.
Is this the final court?
No, this is not the final court. With the Court of Appeals is the final court. As a practical matter, this court is probably final for 90% of the cases that come through, because only certain cases will go to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals will finalize the law in many cases.
I've been told that this court determines what the facts are, and that the Court of Appeals, if they choose, will determine what the law is. Is that the case?
Yes. This court has jurisdiction over the facts, just the same as the trial part did, and over the law. But when the case leaves here, and we can make findings of fact, when the case leaves here, and if it does go to the Court of Appeals, they will determine only on the law. They don't have jurisdiction over the facts.
Who comes here? Do you take testimony here?
No, there's no testimony. We just hear the record. In other words, there's a trial in the Supreme Court in Manhattan. It could be a negligence case, or it could be a criminal case. And after the trial is over, one party would feel, and of course in a criminal case it would be the defendant. If he's convicted, then there would be appeal, otherwise there would be no appeal. The record, the stenographic record, is brought up, notice of appeal is filed, and the attorney sets forth the points where he feels there was error made in the trial below. So we don't see any witnesses, we see no one, we just see the lawyers, and we only do that if the lawyer chooses to make an oral argument before the court.
Now, I know there are 13 justices, including yourself. How many hear a particular case?
Well, there are 5. As you can see, we're sitting on the bench now, and there are 5 chairs. And we sit in panels of 5 judges. So there's 13 judges, and it's randomly selected from day to day by the clerk of the court, and so different benches sit on and hear these cases.
How many cases do you hear a year?
Well, last year we heard 3,200 cases, appeals, and then there were 6,000 motions. So it's quite a lot of work.
Do each of the justices prepare for each and every case that's argued before them?
If you broke it down, each judge hears and is responsible for over 1,000 cases. And that's a tremendous amount of work.
Is a written opinion done for every case?
Yes. We write whether it's an affirmance or a modification or a reversal.
Who writes the opinions?
Well, it's the particular judge is assigned each case, and he becomes the reporting judge. Now, if everyone agrees with him, then he will report, he will write the decision. Of course, if there's a dissent, the judge dissenting will write that dissent. And as far as who reports on a particular case, we go by seniority in chairs here. We have 5 chairs, and if the case, for example, the last case yesterday was heard in that chair, then the first argued case will come today to this chair. And then we just go around with the argued cases and then the submitted cases.
How do your duties as the presiding justice differ from your associate justices?
I suppose you could liken it to being more the chairman of a board in that sense, only because the administrative matters that would come before the court, I kind of bring them together, bring the issues together, and then we decide them as a bench. Somebody has to run the meeting, and I suppose that's what you could call my job.
Now, I know the Appellate Division has other functions other than just hearing cases. Can you discuss that with us?
Well, sure. I know that you, as a lawyer, were probably admitted in this courtroom.
20 years ago in this very room.
So that's where we have jurisdiction over new lawyers. We decide. We have a character and fitness committee. So after someone passes a bar exam, the committee goes into their character and fitness to be a lawyer. And then if they're found to be fit, they're sworn in this, and many times in this courtroom. So you were sworn in here, I was sworn in here, and my father in 1920.
What qualifications does the Character and Fitness Committee look for in those attorneys who want admittance to the bar?
Well, it's just, I would think that it would be common sense. What kind of a person would have the integrity and the moral character and the background and be the responsible person that they should be to be an attorney.
Now, I know also one of your functions here is the Disciplinary Committee.
Yes,
Can you discuss
unfortunately,
that?
yes, we do admit attorneys, but unfortunately we also have jurisdiction over disbarring attorneys and sanctioning attorneys. And so that if there is a complaint, or a client has a complaint, or lawyers, unfortunately, there's a small percentage that are just like everyone else, and they can get themselves into problems. They involved in crimes or just neglecting a client's case. And that can all be brought before a committee, which is appointed by the court, and they make recommendations of what, if they find that there's some violation, they make a recommendation to the court, and the court considers it. Our bench considers it. We consider it just like a regular case.
Now, we're sitting in this magnificent courtroom with beautiful stained glass and artwork and beautiful woodwork. Can you tell us about the courtroom?
Well, this is a gem of a courthouse, as I said before. I think that when it was built for $633,000. It's hard to believe it today. They originally had a budget schedule for $700,000, and so it was brought in 10% under.
Quite unusual.
Budget. I don't know if it'll ever happen again. And 2/3 of the budget was for the construction of the building itself, the physical construction, and 1/3 was for the artwork. And I think it's probably the artwork in this building that makes it so magnificent. From the outside, there are statues for all of the law: English law, French law, Athenian law, and it's 10 statues on the top of the building, and they all represent various aspects of the law.
I noticed one walking in right over the entrance. What is that?
Oh, justice. Yes, that's a particularly interesting one. It was done by Daniel Chester French. Now, he, in 1875, he was the man who did the work of the Minuteman in Concord. It's a very famous statute in Concord, the Minuteman. And he also, in 1931, probably near the end of his career, he did the Lincoln Memorial, Lincoln at the Lincoln Memorial. So he was quite a famous sculptor, and he did that one in the middle, Justice.
I notice on the west side of the building is the Holocaust Memorial. I know you were integrally part of that, getting it done. Can you tell us about that?
Well, that started out about 4 years ago. A friend of mine, David Finkelstein, he thought something should be done by lawyers. And, well, we really could think of anything that should be done. And finally, we evolved on this kind of an idea of putting a memorial up to the injustice of the Holocaust. It would serve two purposes. It would be a memorial to the millions of people who died in the Holocaust, who were the victims, and it would also be a constant reminder to the judges, the lawyers, the public, of the injustice that could go on in the world, and be a reminder to us today as we walk into the courtroom and we have cases on today that the slightest injustice can lead to something like the Holocaust. So hopefully it's a reminder to all of us. So that 3 years ago I took the idea to Mayor Koch, and he was enthusiastic for it. And so we formed a committee. The committee consisted of Judge Mulligan, former Judge Mulligan, William Mulligan, he was a former judge, and Bill Shea, and Ken Bialkin, and they formed a committee and independently raised the funds for the Holocaust Memorial.
Now I see in this courtroom, above the door and your chair, it says, "In God We Trust."
Well, one of the great judges who sat in this court, James B.M. McNally, and in the 60s, he decided that they should have something like that in a courthouse. In God we trust. He was absolutely right. A lot of people agreed with him. Now in every courtroom in the state of New York, we have that statement, "In God we trust."
Now can you tell us a little about the murals in this particular room?
Well, the murals were, those three at the end, they were done independently by three separate artists. And the one in the middle there's an interesting story. In the 70s, a man came in and I was presiding, and the court officer said that he would like to speak to me because his father worked on the building. So I was very happy to meet with him, and he told me that his father was the artist who had painted the mural in the middle called Wisdom, and that the little boy in it was he.
That's quite
and
a story.
so I guess then he must have been in his middle 80s. I guess he would be in his middle 90s today. And so it was an interesting story. He was an artist in Washington.
Judge Murphy, when I walked into this room, one of the first things I saw was the beautiful stained glass dome. What's the history on that?
Yes, that was done by a man who used to work with Tiffany, and he later became his equal. And that was Maitland Armstrong. Maitland Armstrong had an interesting career. He was admitted as a lawyer in 1862. He was, at one time, he was counsel to the Vatican, and then at another time he was counsel to the Kingdom of Italy. Now, I don't know how he had certainly a varied career, but he was related to Fish, Hamilton Fish, who was at that time the Secretary of State to President Grant. And I don't know whether that's how the appointments came about, but primarily I'm sure he's remembered for the work that he's done on this stained glass.
Who was the architect of the building?
Well, the architect was John Brown Lord, and it's interesting that Mr. Lord, he was a relative of the law firm I'm sure you're familiar with, Lord, Day & Lord. It was one of the founders. And also the Brown comes from the Brown Brothers, which later became Brown Brothers Harriman. And Mr. Lord, he died in his early 40s, so I think his career was obviously cut short. But he did a great deal of work with churches, and later on did many homes in Tuxedo Park. He was a Princeton graduate, and I think this is obviously his best work.
Is the courtroom open to the public?
Yes. The court is in session on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 2 o'clock, and on Friday morning at 10 o'clock. And the public is welcome. Anyone can come in.
Just come up to Madison Avenue and 25th Street?
Madison Avenue and 25th, yes.
How does one get to be a judge on the appellate court?
A condition precedent for all of these, for judges of the appellate divisions in the 4 departments, is you must be a Supreme Court judge, and that means an elected Supreme Court judge. So all of the judges here, we have, I think it's 6 from the Bronx and 7 from Manhattan, are elected as Supreme Court judges. And then when there's a vacancy here, the governor has a committee which will interview all the Supreme Court judges who are interested, and then they will make recommendations, and then the governor chooses who should be on this bench.
Well, the governor now is a Democrat.
Yes.
And your bench?
Well, it's true. We have one Republican. And but the only way I can answer that is there aren't many Republican judges in Bronx and Manhattan.
Judge Murphy, thank you very much for inviting us into your courthouse.
Very glad you're here, and we invite everyone to come. As you have made that offer, we invite them to come and see for themselves.
It's time for You Lost Your Life with your hosts, Crash Dummies, Vince and Larry.
Hi!
Hello, and welcome to the show that proves if you don't buckle your safety belt, the loser is you.
That's right, Vince, and by not buckling up, you could end up in places you never dreamed.
Like traction!
Or the emergency room!
Plus, Larry, if you're not buckled up, you could maybe take a ride in a beauty like this. Stay tuned!
You could learn a lot from a dummy. Buckle your safety belt.
Just a fraction of what we spend dining out could help pick up the tab for a good cause. A small part of what we spend on sports could help keep our community in shape. Or some of our time on the phone could help answer society's problems. Won't you get involved? By giving 5% of your income and volunteering 5 hours per week, you can really help your community. This year, make it your goal to give 5. What you get back is immeasurable.
What's the difference between being an appellate court justice and a trial court justice?
Well, as a trial judge, you're in command of the courtroom without anyone else to be concerned about in terms of authority. You are the authority figure. You control the courtroom. That does not apply at the appellate level because you're one of 5 at our court, and other courts one of 4, like the Second Department. And as one of 5, you are not, everything must be done on a basis of collegiality. There's a presiding justice, but you as an individual judge do not have control of that courtroom.
There is quite a difference because we sit here in the cool of the evening, so to speak, rather than in the heat of the day, which is the case with a trial judge and trial lawyers. So realizing what the pressures are on a trial judge does help you evaluate while you're sitting here, the significance of the various rulings that are made and what have you. But in the final analysis, we have to apply the law, even in recognition of those pressures.
I think it took me longer in casual exchanges with my colleagues to become comfortable with the rather rarefied atmosphere of an appellate court. I do miss the interchange with lawyers. I still find myself occasionally thinking that that's a very valuable thing. I always felt I had some kind of good rapport with any particular jury, and that's something that disappears here. So that it's a very different point of view. You give up that lively interchange and that speedy resolution for the reflective life and the scholarly life, which has tremendous attractions, but it takes getting used to.
One misconception is that there's no action in the appellate courts And while I loved being a trial court judge, I was a trial court judge for over 20 years, certainly, and I loved it, that I found that there's more action in the appellate court because the range of subjects that you're dealing with is so much more extensive and diverse. And second, you are constantly engaged not only with the lawyers, but with your colleagues. So it's a challenge both emotionally, psychologically, logically, and sociologically.
Is the court capable of being categorized as either liberal, conservative, or down the middle?
There is no such thing on our bench. You can see decisions which you can say are conservative. There are some you would probably say are liberal. There are probably some you say are moderate. We are not a conservative, liberal, or moderate bench. We decide the cases the way we see them.
You have to understand the appellate division is not one court. The appellate division is 13 judges sitting in panels of 5, so we're hundreds of courts philosophically.
I think it's very difficult to pin a label on this court. We're eclectic, I'll tell you that, but not in the sense of being conservative, not in the sense of being liberal. Each case is a case unto itself, and what may appear to the public to be a conservative decision one day, may a couple of weeks later the same bench come down on another matter which the same public would consider to be a liberal decision. So you really can't pin a label.
You have a good cross-section, and I can predict pretty much how different judges will vote on different issues, but there is no coloration I can give to the entire bench saying it's liberal or so many of the members are liberal or conservative or down the middle.
It's been said that the Appellate Division First Department is a hot bench. What is that?
Just means we're prepared when we go on the bench. We've read the material that's been submitted by the lawyers, and so we're familiar with the cases. And we don't have to sit there and listen to what it's all about. We know what it's about, and simply have to get to the highlights.
I think lawyers are sometimes surprised at the fact that we know their cases so well. Remember that we sit on about 20 appeals a day when we sit, and we sit usually about twice a week. So it means that we're prepared on about 40 appeals a week. And as I say, the lawyers are sometimes surprised at how much we know of their cases.
We've had the records in the case. We've had the briefs in the case. We've had an opportunity to read everything in the case before hearing argument, as opposed to a cold bench, which is a bench which hears argument first and then looks at the case in depth afterwards.
What advice would you give attorneys who appear before the appellate court?
Lawyers will start in this case is about and go into a whole factual background, and since they only have a maximum of 15 minutes, they're really basically wasting their own precious time. I would say to lawyers, take us at our word. We are prepared on what the background of the case is. Hone in immediately on the critical issues and try to persuade us, if you're the appellant on that issue, or if you're the respondent, to try to make sure that we agree that the result in the court from which the appeal is taken was correct.
For one thing, I suggest that the briefs are too long. Gettysburg Address was only about 300 words, and the point was made. You don't need 50 pages to make the usual point in a case on appeal.
The atmosphere counsel should try to cultivate is the come, let us reason together point. I also emphasize that when you're an appellant, it's a very good idea to argue orally. It's an advantage to address the questions of the judges. A questioner is not an adversary. Very commonly a lawyer will feel, oh my God, that's a question, I'm on the defensive. Very often that judge may be on that lawyer's side and may be seeking the assistance of the lawyer in resolving a final doubt or persuading his colleagues. So a question should not be seen as a threat or a hostile intervention by any means, but very often it's an invitation to take a softball and hit it over the fence. Inexperienced attorneys sometimes rebuff the question. They say, I'll get to it later, Judge, That's a very foolish approach. Once in a while, there's an attempt to talk over the question, hoping that it will go away if you keep talking. That's the worst strategy of all. If you don't address the questions, the court sometimes draws the adverse inference that there isn't a very favorable answer to the question.
There are 13 judges in the Appellate Division First Department. Any 5 can be sitting at any one time. Do different benches have different dynamics?
Well, in a certain sense, that's true. You could pick 5 judges who would be very, very vocal at oral argument, and even in conference. You could pick 5 others who would be quieter and tend not to ask as many questions or to debate as strenuously.
The dynamics, the interaction among my colleagues is one of the most interesting facets of this job. When you're in a trial bench, going back to your first question to me, you are like a school teacher. You're there alone. You don't have a relationship with people in other parts. But when you were in this court, you're constantly relating to other judges as well as to the lawyers. And what is fascinating is to see what a change, not only, as you say, the difference in the personnel of the panel makes, but also the addition of one additional judge to the court. What that does to the philosophy, the dynamics, and the end product.
Well, there definitely are. When I'm reading briefs at home, I usually read on the weekend for the sittings in the upcoming week, and I'll see a thorny question which I know will have a certain appeal to some judges and perhaps not to others. And the first thing I do is to check my pocket diary to see how the bench is constituted that day, and it gives you some indication of how you can look ahead and see the way the case may turn. Not always. It's a small barometer, but what I'm saying, I suppose, the human element enters into everything, and it enters into judicial decision-making as well as everything else. We're bound by precedents, but within those precedents, there's always a little latitude to work, and I think that judges there, for good or bad, bring their life experiences, the sum total of their life experiences, and their outlook towards life, their outlook towards these particular issues.
Each appellate panel has what I would call a critical mass, and there are certain judges, and quite properly so, I don't say this with any criticism, that begin with certain premises about certain types of litigation. This is true on the United States Supreme Court. I can assure you that Mr. Justice Rehnquist, in a search and seizure case, brings to bear a different set of premises from Justice Marshall or Justice Blackmun. Every legal scholar knows this. Now, I'm not for a minute comparing the magnitude of what we do here with that, but I'm suggesting that the same dynamics exist and that the makeup of any given bench can be quite critical depending on the subject matter of the appeal.
There's a proposal to reduce the bench from 5 judges sitting to 3. What is
No
your
real
opinion?
movement, one suggestion.
No movement, one suggestion?
No, one judge in the second department has come up with a suggestion. I'm glad to see he's thinking about it. But I have no objection to doing that, but I don't see it happening. Require a constitutional amendment, and I don't see enough people interested in doing it.
Well, I think most of the judges and most lawyers are against it. They want a difference of opinion, and you get more of a reflection of the thinking of people when you have 5 judges and not 3.
I think a 5-judge bench is a good one. I think that there are broader views among 5. The cases get a deeper study with 5. I think that if we possibly can, we should remain with 5, because I think that the litigants and the society are well served by the more searching examination which 5 can give.
We'll be right back after this short break. You're watching Lawline. Stay with us.
Every year, thousands of babies die from choking, suffocating, or other breathing emergencies. Just imagine How many of them could be saved if only they came with instructions? Please learn American Red Cross Infant and Child CPR. American Red Cross. We help you help others.
Every year, thousands of people are killed with a frying pan. Reduce your intake of high-fat fried foods and help reduce your risk of cancer and heart disease. For a free booklet on low-fat eating, call 1-800-EAT-LEAN.
Frank, you're the clerk of the court of the Appellate Division First Department. What are your duties?
Well, I have the duty of running the everyday operation of the court, supervising all the departments, answering telephone calls all the time. We have 2 deputy clerks, and that deputy, my deputy assistant in the clerk's office, is in charge of the clerk's office. That's the main office as you come in the court downstairs. And we have another deputy clerk, Alan Berger. He's in charge of the opinion room, and he takes care of all of the orders and decisions which go out. Now, I supervise both of their works, and I work also with the judges on a daily basis.
Now, if a lawyer comes running up to your courthouse, running up the steps saying, I need a stay, I have to have this stayed immediately, where does he go?
We have a senior court attorney who will examine his papers, ascertain first that we have jurisdiction, most important thing, that he's filed a notice of appeal, and then he will discuss the matter. By the way, if an attorney comes up for a stay, he must bring his adversary. The justices will not consider any application on its own. So the court attorney will discuss the matter with both attorneys before he will bring them up to a justice. Maybe he can reconcile the matter before he has to take them to a justice.
Now, I know there are 13 judges here in the First Department,
yes,
and only 5 sit at any one time from the 13. Who selects those 5 who sit?
I make up the schedule. It's a monthly schedule. Every month we prepare a schedule. When I say we, I confer with Presiding Justice Murphy concerning the number of days the court will sit. That depends on how many cases are ready on the calendar. And by ready, I mean what cases have been noticed by the bar, by the attorneys, for hearing by the court. We will take that number, we'll divide it, we'll decide how many cases we should have on per day. There'll be so many days in a month. Then I will randomly select the judges who are going to sit.
Frank, do you find that there are different combinations of judges have different dynamics?
I think that they do. They don't differ very much, and they can't differ very much because they have to follow the stare decisis that's already been set for them. That's why they are always conferring with each other. Some benches may be a little different than other benches, but they have to keep to the same determinations.
Do you take into consideration the personalities involved when you set the calendars?
No, not at all.
It's all random selection.
That's correct.
What is the magic witching hour of 3 o'clock?
That's the time we release, 3 o'clock is the time we release the judges' names, and that they will prepare themselves. I assume that counsel feel that certain judges think certain ways, and that they will prepare their arguments for the next day accordingly.
Now, there's talk in Albany about substantially cutting the judiciary budget this year. Will that affect your court?
It has not affected us yet, and we're not aware that it's going to. They are looking to reduce some clerks' lines as a result of legislation last year. I haven't heard any bad news yet.
There's one proposal to cut the bench down from 5, which it is now, to 3. How do you feel about that?
I think that it's better set at 5. That is a reflection of the bar's feeling. I worked with the governor's task force recently, and the attorneys on that task force were, I think, unanimous in asking for 5-person benches.
Do you think that the 5th Department is a reality for Nassau and Suffolk County?
I think presently, in the present budget situation, I don't think so.
Now, I know you're involved in the restoration of this wonderful building. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I know that they have done much restoration while I've been here. I came in 1967, and during that time, the building ran down quite a bit. A few years ago, they restored the outside, working on the statues, securing them. They worked in the courtroom itself. All the paintings and murals were all cleaned. We had the dome re-leaded so that the glass wouldn't fall on counsel, as I said before. And all of the paintings and the gold leaf everywhere in the lobby and in the courtroom, everything was cleaned.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Ron.
People in the National Guard and Reserve make up over 40% of our nation's combat-ready forces. It's a job that requires them to face some very big challenges. So please, don't make their biggest challenge asking you for time off to do their training.
Mr. Aldridge, you, got a minute?
Be a hero. Give your employees the freedom to protect ours.
I don't know if you'll remember me, but I'll never forget you. I'm Mr. Signorelli's daughter. I didn't think about what would happen if he went into cardiac arrest. I didn't realize that at 6 a.m. a nurse would call the shots and save his life.
If you have the smarts and the guts to study biology, chemistry, anatomy, and psychology, call 1-800-962-NURSE. If caring were enough, anyone could be a nurse.
Hello, I'm Alan Schnorman. You're watching Lawline. We're here at the Appellate Division 1st Department. It's been said that the 1st Department is a collegial bench. Can you comment on that?
We're known as a collegial court because we live together every day. We have lunch together every day, so that the conversations and the arguments continue right through our lunch hour.
We have to discuss everything. We have to try to reason out positions, see if we can come to an agreement, and if we can't, that we take our positions logically and as on the basis of complete negotiation and discussion with other members of the bench to the best of our ability.
It is a court which of necessity works together. In almost every case, we are 5 judges who work on a case, who discuss a case, and make an attempt to come with one voice at the end of it. We don't always succeed in coming out with one voice, but we try.
Do you sometimes feel like an advocate when you try to convince another judge as to your point of view?
Well, you try to become an advocate of what you think is right. It's not a position that you're espousing. It's what a right result. And sure, you become an advocate. You debate it, and you try to be persuasive, and you're always cordial, because it's a situation where we always work together. We genuinely like each other. We all get along very well here, and there's no animosity or acrimony in what we do. We just work well together.
Nothing is permanent, and we have 13 judges on this bench. 5 judges sit on a particular case, so you can't become angry at one judge to the exclusion of the others, because the next day that same judge will see things as you see it in another case.
We are all advocates for a viewpoint after a while. We like to think that we suspend judgment as long as possible, but it's in the nature of things, once a viewpoint develops inside a judge, that they begin to see great things about it and have a stake in persuading their colleagues.
I think the most fascinating part of an appellate court judge's life is the byplay that goes on both during the argument and then in our case conference after the argument when we vote on these cases. And in the latter, at the conference, you are certainly an advocate all over again. You're arguing for a certain position based on the legal arguments made in the record. And sometimes that argument begins, I like to tell students of the art, it begins while you're on the bench. If you hear questions that you think are calculated to go in a certain, that indicate that judges are leaning in a certain direction in their view of the case, and you have a distinct view and a different view, I think the best time to advance it is while the questioning is taking place in front of the lawyers, so that the judges will not go too far out on a limb, you might say, and will know that there is another position within the court itself. And I think that the debate begins almost at that point.
Could you possibly ask questions that may very well change that other judge's opinion?
You can. You can ask questions and you can point to a contrary view or to a Fourth Department case or to recent cases which seem to challenge what would otherwise appear to be a settled point of view on a point of law. And you can arrest their attention to a certain point, even as the argument unfurls.
What is a typical workday like?
My workday is a little different. We're all different. We have our own style. I happen to be an early worker. I get here at about 7 o'clock. My experience is that between 7 and 10, I can get a tremendous amount of work done without interruption, without phone calls, without applications from lawyers, all of which are part of the function that we do. But those 3 hours without interruption are easily equal to 5 or 6 hours during the normal work day. We go into conference, our opinion conference on Monday. We just switched it. We used to start about 10 or 10:30. We've reversed it to a little bit of a later hour because we require more time to get ready in the morning, because I have to go over, as we all do, every other judge's writings, his memoranda, his opinions, and then be prepared to vote one way or another in conference. We go on a bench at 2 o'clock. That's every day except Monday, because Monday is opinion conference day, and that can go on and on until you're through. And as far as the courtroom itself is concerned, we really don't control the time we get through, because the requests for time are made by counsel, within our rules, of course, and when the last one is heard, that's when we get through.
Can you discuss the uniqueness of your court in presiding over New York County, which is the World Financial Center?
We have some of the most difficult and interesting lawsuits that you can get in the United States. Cases that are come from the financial community, that come from the biggest corporations that we have in this country, and some of the biggest banks that we have in this country. They are cases that are funneled into this court.
I believe that we're the world's financial capital in terms of applying the law to these problems. And this is the most exciting court in the world, because, as you know, unlike the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court of the United States, we can review the facts, and we have the opportunity to go into all kinds of factual issues that other appellate courts can't.
I think it makes the work more interesting. There's no aspect of the law that I've ever found unchallenging, but I think to be confronted with a case that has an international flavor, like a letter of credit at the time the Shah of Iran was deposed, multi-million-dollar claims based on international transactions, I think it's kind of heady to be sitting on cases of that kind, cases that you know will have a big effect in the market, the financial market, and will have perhaps international overtones. So I think that adds a challenge, a dimension of challenge to our work that might not exist in any other appellate court. I also think that here we see many more constitutional challenges to state and city legislation than you would in another appellate court. And I think that adds to the excitement of the work.
Our courts are clogged with criminal cases and trial parts. Have you found that to be true as well in the appellate division?
It's changed in numbers, in the sheer volume of cases that come to us. When I came here January 2, 1978, about 30 to 35% of our dockets represented criminal appeals. It once reached 50%, and I think it just went over the 50% mark. It's probably back now to about 40%, but a tremendous rise in just the volume of cases. and in the infinite variety of factual issues and legal issues that come to us.
Why do criminal cases take precedence over civil cases?
Well, certainly the law requires that criminal cases take precedence over civil cases, and that among the criminal cases, if a person is in jail, that his or her case takes precedence over someone who is out of jail. So the law requires that.
Can you tell us about the recent decision of your court, which held that defendants had to be arraigned within 24 hours of their arrest?
Well, I just heard of a decision coming from the Court of Appeals today where they are mandating that there be arraignments in 24 hours. That decision first started in a trial court. It was appealed here. We affirmed that decision, and I understand the Court of Appeals affirmed it today. I think that is very essential, that a person who is arrested go before a judge, be told what the charges are as soon as possible, and that bail be set or not set as soon as possible.
Well, what happens if they're not arraigned within the 24-hour period?
Unless the people have an adequate excuse, an adequate explanation, that means that ostensibly the defendant can go free.
They'll have to get up to snuff. There's no reason why a defendant can't be arraigned in 24 hours. You have to understand, people are being taken in and punished, in effect, for 3 days without having the opportunity to go before a magistrate to determine whether or not there's even a reason for them to be held.
On a prior Law Line show, we've had the Chief of Police of the New York City Department, which was in charge of arraigning defendants and getting them from arrest to arraignment within a certain period of time. He stated that it was impossible for him at this point to arraign someone within 24 hours.
I don't know what he has in his mind, but I used to, before I had this hat, be the administrative judge of the city courts. And we were able to, on a citywide average, reduce arrest to arraignment delay to 22 hours. And we were pretty much consistent in arraigning people within 22 hours of arrest. It seems to me that it's a goal that is achievable. It's a matter of everyone getting together and communicating with each other. The main problem in arrest arraignment delay is that you have a lot of people wearing a lot of different hats and they don't communicate with each other. And since you can't have an ombudsman to tell them what to do, they have to have a spirit of cooperation and agree with each other that they should cooperate. The Court of Appeals and our court basically is telling them this is the push has come to shove. Now's the time to talk to each other and to work it out. And we've done it before, they'll do it again.
Well, I think in the case that came before us, already the powers that be, including the police, the district attorneys, legal aid, had combined to get the time down. So it's not true at all that it would take 40 or 50 hours to arraign a defendant. It's a process of pushing, but it can be done, and I think certainly that's the right decision. There is no reason whatsoever why a person who is accused of a crime should sit in jail for 24, 40, 50 hours without at least being told what he or she is charged with. This system can work, it just takes pushing.
We'll be right back after this short break. You're watching Lawline. Stay with us.
Randy Travis on strings. Branford Marsalis on the horn. Paul Schaefer on keys. Carly Simon on lead. There are a lot of different parts to play in the American Red Cross. Play your part.
The animals in the forest. If they could talk, what would they say? They might say, be careful with fire in the forest. Just like Smokey says, only you can prevent forest fires.
Are there any decisions that you participated in that stand out particularly in your mind?
Yes, one in which the Court of Appeals reversed us almost unanimously, the America's Cup case, which I was the sole judge here dissenting. I believe that the Cup should have gone to New Zealand because it was racing with a monohull against a catamaran, and I thought that was so basically unfair that the very essence of sportsmanship was being violated.
Most recently, I wrote an opinion involving babies born with crack addiction, and whether or not that could indicate neglect by the mother. This is dealing civilly, not criminally, not dealing with the prosecution of the mother, but whether a woman who took crack shortly before her baby was born, to the point where the baby was born with cocaine in its system at the time of delivery, whether that would indicate neglect or could indicate neglect. And I thought that it could indicate neglect.
I wrote a couple of defamation decisions. This one was in a case brought by Dallas Parks, the umpire, against George Steinbrenner, who had made some less than flattering comments about Mr. Parks. But as you know, in this country, our concern with freedom of expression is so overriding, notwithstanding that we understand the considerations of the sensibilities of persons, that freedom of speech, as I say, is so overriding. In that case, we found that there was no defamation, that essentially Mr. Steinbrenner was voicing his opinion, and that in terms of an umpire who, in the historical context, have unfortunately been the recipients of much, verbal opinion abuse, so to speak, that would not be actionable. That was gave me a chance to go back into baseball history, etc.
About the second week I was here, we had the Bernard Getz case, and I was astonished when I became part of that bench to realize that the law of self-defense in New York was in quite a state of uncertainty. You might think that self-defense, where there are cases in the yearbooks going back to 1200 about the reach of that defense, that the law would be cast in concrete. Not so. Great divisions emerged in that case, which the Court of Appeals resolved. The key to the case involved the instructions of the district attorney, a very capable attorney named Gregory Waples, as to what the defendant's state of mind had to be in order to sustain the self-defense defense. That it was a mixture. The ultimate resolution of the case was that it was quite appropriate to tell a grand jury, and indeed a petty jury thereafter, that the validity of self-defense depends not entirely on what a reasonable outsider would think was a threat to life or limb, that's required, but that belief that one is threatened must be measured against a reasonable standard, a reasonably objective standard. So it's a hybrid test. The defendant must genuinely believe that they're about to suffer death or grievous bodily injury, and perhaps have no chance to safely retreat. That's a codicil to the rule. But secondly, that is not to be measured solely by what the defendant says he thought, but by some objective standard of what a reasonable person might think. But now here's the last codicil, which complicates it still further, getting back to a subjective side. What a defendant with defendant's history and experience might reasonably think.
We were faced here with a choice between using a purely subjective feeling on the part of the perpetrator or using community standards. And what we did ultimately was to integrate the two. Second, community feeling about what was happening in the streets of New York City or in the subways. I'm a subway rider myself. That was a critical thing. And we are always social engineers in this court. It's important I think, to try to restrict what we do because we're lawyers as well. But a lawyer who is simply a technician is not worth his salt. That we are increasingly requiring lawyers who are engineers, who are philosophers, as well as just mere technicians.
I know the Holocaust Memorial, which is attached to the outside of the courthouse, has special significance to you. Can you discuss that with us?
I was born in Germany and came here as a child during the Hitler time. And my mother's parents perished in a concentration camp, and my mother's brother was one of the first victims. So 3 of my very immediate family were victims of the Nazis. And their photographs are in the foundation of the monument. As the monument was being erected, I took the photographs of my uncle and my grandparents and sealed them into the base of the monument. The Holocaust is the ultimate injustice. And had the judges and the others responsible for justice in that society done what judges are supposed to do, it might not have happened. Judges have a great responsibility, and this responsibility is, among others, but the greatest responsibility is to stand between the state and the citizen. And as much as judges in criminal cases have to be prepared to protect the society against the wrongdoer, they also have to be prepared to protect the citizen against the overreachings of the state.
From its beginning, the courthouse has been widely celebrated as that rare public building where beauty and art coexist in perfect harmony with utility and function. This historic building and the Holocaust Memorial, which is now part of it, stands as a reminder to lawyer, litigant, and judge that justice is the highest aspiration of humanity. We'd like to express our thanks to Presiding Justice Francis Murphy and the Associate Justices of the Appellate Division First Department for allowing us to visit with them. This is Alan Schnorman, and as always, I'd like to thank you for watching Lawline.
Thank you.